We do have a guest in our midst here right now because we are on the brink of history. Tomorrow is Election Day, and it means for the first time, the state of Virginia will elect a woman to be governor for the first time in the history of the Commonwealth. And there are a lot of storylines about this statewide election. Joining us now to talk about it is Dr. Jesse Richman of Old Dominion University, professor and political expert. We appreciate you for coming in and joining us in the studio today.
Great to be here.
So a lot has happened already with this race. I mean, it is the talk. I was in Louisiana all last week, and there were people talking to me about Virginia politics all the way down in the bayou. So it really has been the center focus for a lot of people. We're in the last day before Election Day. Both sides of the gubernatorial race with Winsome Sears and Abigail Spanberger, they're out and about today. What do you think should be their push ahead of Election Day in the last hours?
Well, so Spanberger, I think, is trying to finish strong with a message about economic issues and trying to solidify turnout across different parts of the Democratic Party. Sears is seeking to portray this as a battle between common sense and nonsense, arguing that the Democratic Party is a party of nonsense. That argument is perhaps thinner on substance than it might be, but that's her closing argument.
And they'll be making those arguments today. I'm going to read out just real quick. They're on their bus tours today for Abigail Spanberger, the Democratic candidate. She'll be in Charlottesville, Alexandria, Lynchburg, Blacksburg, and Smithfield. Meanwhile, Winsome Sears will hold the event. She held, I think, one earlier in Richmond, Roanoke, Virginia Beach, and Prince William County. And earlier, we actually were able to get video of Winsome Sears. She was speaking to people, I believe this was in Richmond earlier this morning, and she did speak to a reporter there. Let's see if we can listen to what her remarks are this morning, just 24 hours before polls open.
Safety and security. Abigail is not about that. She's soft on crime. She voted against so many very good things in D.C. that it would help them. And even Biden, when he was not cognitively in decline, vetoed that bill. I mean, she's also going to get rid of the energy, oil and gas, she said she's going to get rid of. And then what do we do? What do we do for energy? We cannot afford this woman. She is just wrong for Virginia. Finally, you saw she took $150,000 from the National Democrat gerrymandering Redistricting Commission. What was that about? Because she said that in the summer she was not going to take up redistricting. But these people showed up with $150,000. She took it the very next day. We are in redistricting. Abigail is for Abigail.
Do you think the president could have done more to help your campaign in Virginia?
I think the president has a lot on his mind. Have you seen all the national and foreign policy that he's been enacting? He's a busy man.
All right, Fox News. Get into the question here. It was I think some people were surprised that President Obama brought up transgender issues, DEI, some of the stuff that Abigail Spanberger has tried to stay away from.
Yeah.
Do you think he was revealing maybe just how far to the left someone like Spanberger would be? What was your reaction?
Well, she's always been far to the left. It's only the legacy media that have been on her side that, the minute that she announced, they've always said moderate Abigail. Like, in what way was she ever moderate if she's voted almost 100% of the time with Nancy Pelosi? Is Nancy Pelosi a moderate? And by the way, is men in girls' locker room a moderate position? Of course not. Is not having energy a moderate position? Is keeping our borders open a moderate position? Is having only one type of education opportunity for our children to thrive a moderate position? So, no. This, I'm sorry to say, and our Attorney General whose mom came from Cuba. We've seen what happens when the press takes sides, and it's so wrong. I've seen it in Jamaica. It is absolutely wrong. And what the press needs to start asking itself, I would say the legacy press, is why does half of America not trust them? That's what they need to do. All we need are just the facts. When did we stop doing that? Yes.
Tyler?
Question for Attorney General.
Madam Lieutenant Governor, if there's a Virginian on the fence who's going to see this story, what's your elevator pitch to them?
Do you like what we've been doing in Virginia? Well, Abigail Spanberger was never part of it. She hasn't been part of creating any of these jobs. She hasn't been part of helping Virginia to remain safe and secure. Soft on crime. What would you say, Mr. Attorney General?
I'd say that we've seen the most remarkable 4-year turnaround any state has seen in modern American history. We've gone from being near the bottom in job creation. We've been one of the last states to ever reopen our schools. We had 8 straight years up until 2021 of more individuals moving out of Virginia than moving to Virginia, something that had not happened in over 100 years.
There you go.
And we've seen this remarkable turnaround, $140 billion of new investment that's come into Virginia. That's greater than the last 4 governors combined, 1.5 job openings for every Virginian looking for a job, the highest labor force participation rate we've ever seen. And in my role as Attorney General, as the top prosecutor, when I came into office, Virginia had a murder rate at a 20-year high and the highest levels of addiction deaths ever seen. And I said that we were going to make our public safety my #1 mission. That's what we've done. And we promised we'd put more cops on the streets. We launched Operation Bold Blue Line to put more cops on the street. We said we'd prosecute repeat violent offenders. We did that. And we've seen in our ceasefire cities, we launched this, murder rates dropped as high as 60% in some of our ceasefire cities. And the #1 drop of addiction deaths of any state in the entire country, more than double the national average. So this is what we know. Since 2021, more Virginians are working today, more Virginians are thriving today, more businesses are relocating here. Now more people are moving to Virginia than leaving, and more Virginians are alive today. And so this Virginia renaissance that we've seen is because Virginians hired Glenn, Winsome, and myself 4 years ago. And I think it's a remarkable turnaround.
John, what do you say?
Yeah, listen. Everybody, whether they're on the right side of the spectrum or the left side of the spectrum, wants a job. They want to feel like if they're willing to put in work, they've got opportunity. This Republican team is going to deliver opportunities for every Virginian, white, black, young, old, Jewish, Christian, Muslim, whoever you are, we're going to deliver that. Democrats are not going to do it. Who do you think is going to be better at being the ambassador for the state? Somebody like me who ran communications at the U.S. Chamber of Commerce and was a partner at a global public affairs firm, or an angry poetry professor from the local community college who has done nothing but advance issues that kill jobs? It's an easy decision, but it's an important decision.
All right, guys, we have one more question.
One more question. Yes, sir. I'm sorry, I can't hear you.
Why don't the election is there a message that you guys wish you had stressed more and feel resonates
No, we've been doing the work. I mean, we have stressed everything possible. Why? Because we've been among the voters. The voters elect us from among them, not from above them. And how do we know how to serve except we continue? I mean, we have not stopped, and some people would say campaigning, but it's not campaigning. It's simply being with the voters, understanding what's on their hearts. Because ultimately, voters want to know, do you see me? Do you know me? Do you know what's wrong with my life, and how are you going to make that better? And you're not going to make things harder for me. So we are not leaving anything on the field, right? We're going to be exhausted tomorrow because we're going to win.
All right.
Okay, a lot to kind of digest there. We have Dr. Jesse Richman here from ODU. Okay, let's first focus. Before we went into that soundbite that was from just this morning, we were talking about what her approach might be 24 hours before Election Day. Did it match more so what you thought it would be?
So what we see partly, and some of the latest campaign signs they're putting up in people's yards to match this, returning, I would say, a little belatedly to the message that the Republicans and the executive branch in Virginia have done a good job. Youngkin remains relatively popular in the state, certainly compared to Donald Trump. And so the more that the Sears campaign can tie itself to the Youngkin administration, can make the argument this is continuing on a record of success, I think that's to their benefit. And that's part of what she was trying to emphasize. And you've got the attacks on Spanberger, of course, as well, which remains an important element of the campaign.
Let's talk about something you just mentioned there of her attempts to attach herself to the Youngkin administration. She was asked, though, about President Trump in that. And so at this point, what we've gotten from the president in regards to this race, the gubernatorial race, he has still, to this point, not right out said, I endorse Winsome Sears for governor. Now, he has spoken positively of the Republican candidate for governor in Virginia, saying that the current the Democratic candidate would be bad, the Republican candidate would be good, but he hasn't come out and fully endorsed her like he has for the gubernatorial candidate on the Republican side in New Jersey. My question to you about that, she says, well, he has a lot of things going right now. Do you read into the fact that he has not fully endorsed and said her name? And do you think that voters are actually paying attention to that when it comes to casting their ballot?
Well, so the Spanberger camp, this is an interesting question, an issue that cuts multiple ways. I think arguably one of the reasons why we haven't seen that endorsement from Trump is a kind of grudge over some of the things that Winsome Sears said after January 6th. And Trump has a long memory for grudges. That might be part of the story. Part of it could also be strategic on the part of the president. An endorsement in Virginia, given that his popularity is not very high in Virginia. Most of the polling, it's in the low 40s maybe. To win, Sears needs more than just Trump supporters. And so a Trump endorsement is potentially a double-edged sword. It might help motivate some Trump supporters to vote for her, but at the same time it could lead to losses among the kinds of independent voters that she needs, the people who like Youngkin but don't necessarily like Trump, that she really absolutely has to win if she's going to pull out a surprise upset in this gubernatorial race.
Yeah, it's been very interesting to follow that, and I guess you can argue there's still time tonight. The president is expected to have like a telephone type of rally in support for these races. So we'll see what can potentially come out of that. But you would imagine if it were to happen, it would have happened already, as early voting has been out and about, and particularly when he was here in Virginia not that long ago. So we go from one president to a former president. We know just in the last few days, former President Barack Obama came and he visited there at Old Dominion University, supporting the Democratic candidate Abigail Spanberger, giving a speech there. I want to ask you, Dr. Richman, about that. How could potentially his visit affect, if at all, the turnout for this particular race? And was there anything about that stood out to you about what he said or what was shared during that rally on Saturday?
Well, so there's a lot to talk about with that rally. Nice that he chose to come to Norfolk. I remember the last time he came to Norfolk to stump for a Democratic candidate for governor back in 2009. It didn't go terribly well for that candidate at that point. A lot of people come out to see Obama, but I think there was really a sense of enthusiasm for Spanberger also in the crowd. And they, of course, they had the signs, as you saw, vote on one side, Spanberger on the other, and it's explicitly framed as a get out the vote rally. Obama told people, go vote, get your friends and family to vote, that sort of thing. It's an attempt, I think, in some ways to address one of the challenges for the Spanberger campaign, which is turnout in some of the more heavily African-American parts of the state. In Norfolk, Richmond, Portsmouth, Early voting turnout is up a little bit from where it was 4 years ago, last time there was a gubernatorial race, but only a little bit. A lot of other parts of the state, it's up quite a lot more. So overall, statewide, it's up about 30%. Norfolk, Portsmouth, Richmond, it's up about 5%.
Which is, I pulled the numbers. This is from the Virginia Public Access Project. As of Sunday, more than 1.4 million Virginians had cast their ballots early. About 300,000 or so more early ballots than the same time frame back in 2021 when we had the last gubernatorial race.
Yeah, exactly. So overall, early voting's up, but it's been lagging in some of the places like Norfolk, Portsmouth, Richmond, where there's a large African American population. Obama is coming in to try to boost turnout in those urban core areas that are really quite important for victory for a Democratic candidate. Spanberger's doing well enough in the polls. She probably doesn't really need that if the polls are accurate, but it's potentially important. Of course, we don't know exactly who's been voting in any of the early turnout. It could be that the early turnout overall is very favorable for Spanberger. Could be it's not. But Obama's here partly to boost turnout.
And of course, we'll see what that means tomorrow.
We'll see what that means.
We'll see what happens.
One rally's not, it can make a marginal difference, but probably a marginal difference because most of the people who came to that rally were probably already going to be voting.
And to your point, you mentioned Hampton Roads and what kind of voting looks like right now from the early standpoint. But can you speak to how vital Hampton Roads is in this particular statewide election?
It's important. If you look at the Democratic coalition in the state, the places where Democrats have seats in the House of Delegates, the places where the bulk of the vote comes from, it's the kind of urban belt from Hampton Roads through Richmond up to Northern Virginia, D.C. suburbs. And so having a solid Democratic level of support there in those regions is important. The rest of the state matters too, obviously. You get a solid Democratic turnout, maybe not winning, but solid turnout other places, that makes a huge difference as well. But getting support in those core parts of the Democratic coalition in the state is important, both for the governor's race, but also for House of Delegates.
You mentioned the polling.
Mm-hmm.
The latest poll that came out ahead of the election tomorrow, Emerson College released its final poll. And in it, they have Spanberger ahead by 11 points over Winsome Sears. And data showing that Spanberger had gained support amongst male voters as well. This was taken, by the way, October 30th to the 31st is when this poll data was brought forth. But I want to start, actually, we're going to go to the Attorney General race, and then we're going to come up to the Lieutenant Governor race. In the race for Attorney General, the poll found that it is still a toss-up. Of course, this has been the talk of not only Virginia, but it's even reached to the national ranks and federal offices, even the president talking about this race. You have Democratic candidate Jay Jones currently leading, according to the Emerson College poll, Attorney General Jason Miyares, the incumbent Republican, 49 to 47%, with a 4% of voters still undecided. Now, of course, that comes after the release of those text messages in which it showed that Jones had made comments that if given a choice, he would shoot the then House Speaker Todd Gilbert over Hitler and other dictators, and then some other comments about Gilbert's children and things that have really blown up in the political landscape. Again, the president has spoken about it. J.D. Vance, the vice president, has spoken about it. It's constantly come up amongst Republicans and leaders here across the state. Are you surprised at all, though, that with all of that, with it being the focal point for Republicans in this particular political race since they've come out, that this poll will show them up at 2%?
It's a little surprising. At the same time, I think it reflects a trend we've seen in some of the other polling as well. Miyares got a big bump out of those revelations, pulled a little ahead, and then I think that advantage has begun to fade. Memories fade. Jones continues to emphasize a message which diminishes a focus on himself personally for a focus on the national picture. He's trying to nationalize the issue, focus on the partisan divide. Do you want, and so minimizing the extent to which his own record, his own capabilities, his own character is important for a focus instead on what's going on with the national campaign, what's going on with the Trump administration. So let's widen the aperture, let's focus on that instead. And I think that's allowed him to staunch some of the bleeding politically. It's very close in the Attorney General's race, by no means decided. If the polling's right, somewhat different if we look at the governor's race, where the polling, as you pointed out, tends to show Spanberger with a substantial lead. So the polls wouldn't have to be much wrong at all for either Attorney General candidate to win. The polls would have to be dramatically wrong in a way we haven't usually seen in Virginia polling if Winsome Sears ends up winning the governor's race.
I mean, it really has been in a very interesting way. I don't think in the past I remember hearing so much about an AG race in this capacity for a statewide election, but it really has kind of taken. I mean, you even heard the after the gubernatorial debate, the only one that we had, you heard from the Republicans there saying, "Hey, Jay Jones, that is, that's the focal point moving forward." They were going to run that continuing for the rest of this race. So it is interesting. Yes, as you mentioned that the percentage, the lead that was polled earlier has definitely dwindled down, but Miyares was ahead in some polls there for a bit within the last few weeks. So I was surprised to see this kind of switch here. And then he also was one of the speakers at the rally on this weekend. And I know there were probably some people who wondered if that would take place. And what do you think that signals, too, from the Democratic side of things, that, hey, yeah, we're still going to have Jay be a part of this event, this moment that we know the nation's going to see?
Yeah, I thought it represented a certain degree of chutzpah on the part of the Democratic campaign, maybe a little overconfidence. It was a decision that the Spanberger campaign thinks they're doing well enough that they can take a little bit of a risk. Spanberger had tried to distance herself from Jones to a moderate extent, right? And Winsome Sears' campaign argument was, well, you really haven't distanced yourself very much. I think this confirmed that she hasn't distanced herself much at all when she's inviting him to come speak at her big rally with Obama. So does this mean Democrats have been a little overconfident in terms of, or does it mean that voters are moving towards forgiving Jones for the texts, and on we go in terms of, there's been lots of coarse and violent political rhetoric in American politics over the last number of years, and maybe voters are, for the most part, willing to overlook that if it's someone they think is on their side politically.
We'll certainly find out very soon to see what the result is there, because I know that would be interesting to see as people are trying to, usually you would imagine voters, they vote down ticket, which I think is probably what some of the candidates are banking on here with Spanberger polling so well. But it'll be interesting to see how that goes if we do get, I guess you will call it a split ticket of Democrat, or Democrat, Republican, whatever you think it could be. It'll be that's something that I know I'm focusing in on very acutely. But let's talk about the other race. With the lieutenant governor race there, you got Ghazala Hashmi, the Democrat there, leading John Reed by 2 points according to the last CNU Wasson poll. There wasn't any Emerson data on this particular race. But even within that 2%, that's down from 9 points in a previous poll. That's been an interesting race to me because I don't think it has received the biggest kind of notoriety amongst, all three statewide races. But you heard there from John Reed speaking this morning, it really seems like lately he's been pushing to try to get himself in spaces to where he can be heard a lot more from his position. How do you think that race could shape up?
That's a really interesting race. I think Virginians have tended not to engage with it very much. Hashemi hasn't run a very good campaign. She outraised Reed about 6-1 or something like that, lots more money. But she hasn't really made much effective use of it, it would seem. Her messaging hasn't cut through. A lot of Virginians remain somewhat undecided about that race, which may end up defaulting to party loyalties, which might, if Spanberger does well, that might pull Hashemi through. But interestingly, the polling on Reed-Hashemi seems to have paralleled much more closely the Jones-Miyares polling than the Spanberger Earl Sears polling. And so I'm not quite sure why that race has followed the Attorney General race in terms of the polling, but it's tended to do that. And what that suggests is that Reed may have a real possibility, a real prospect of having a good night. We'll see how the final round of voting goes. We'll see who turns out. But that race seems close.
And it's a good reminder of the history that's on the line here, right? We talked about already between the gubernatorial race, no matter what, we're going to have a woman who's going to be leading the Commonwealth for the first time. But even within the lieutenant governor race, you got Ghazala Hasmi, first Indian American to be nominated. You have John Reed, first openly gay man on either party to go for a statewide election in this case too. There's so much history just completely down the ticket, not even talking about the Attorney General candidates there as well. So a lot is on the line from that standpoint, but let's talk about some of the issues right now, if we have you for a few more minutes for you. First, the government shutdown. I think a lot of people are looking at the races that are taking place in both Virginia and in New Jersey as a way of kind of a litmus test to see what people are feeling about what's going on in Washington, D.C. Obviously, the big talker right now in D.C., 34 days of a shutdown. We're almost at a record. How do you see that playing into the polling tomorrow? And what are you particularly looking to see out of tomorrow in relation to people's thoughts about Washington?
The government shutdown has been lingering partly because neither party has been convinced that they're losing the public on it. The polling's been somewhat ambiguous. Overall, probably a little bit better for the Democrats than the Republicans, but a mix. And so these election outcomes might provide additional information. I think part of what we've seen with the polling is simply that people are in their partisan corners. Republicans are mostly saying pro-Republican things to the pollsters, but it's not necessarily really about the shutdown. Democrats the same way. And so the shutdown goes on. The pain continues to mount for federal employees and for increasingly as well potentially people who depend upon the federal government for various kinds of benefits. There's an ongoing situation involving SNAP, food stamp benefits. Those look like they're going to be extended a little bit longer with some emergency money. The Virginia governor stepped in to try to shore up Virginia's program, but it's going to be a close thing. The money's going to run out soon, even if this emergency money that courts are telling the Trump administration they can use is used. It's not enough to go much further. So pain mounts. Washington remains gridlocked. There are a whole set of different issues that I think are contributing to that gridlock, from the immediate fights about health care funding and other things, whether to just reopen the government clean bill, as Republicans have been pushing for the last 34 days, or need to include these various renewals of money for Obamacare and so forth. That's one of the fights. There's a broader fight about the federal budget, about the president's authority to repurpose funds. All of that's in the background as well. Those are really hard issues to work out. Democrats are playing from a minority position in the Senate, but they're able to block because of the filibuster. The president wants the filibuster ended as a way to end the shutdown. And so this has been a shutdown that has often flown under the radar of a very active news cycle, and yet it's going to have to be settled at some point. And it's not being settled as fast as I think most voters would like.
Well, I wonder if the results of these two statewide elections will play into the speed, or at least the timing of when things, I mean, because you think about it, right? Tomorrow is election day. Coincidentally, it will be 35 days at the end of that day that will tie the record for the longest government shutdown that we've had in the history of our country. It will also kind of show maybe how voters think about what's going on, and potentially could give either party a little bit more of a, a little bit more power, maybe a little bit more say, hey, your side, people are saying that they don't like it right now. They don't like what you're doing. So I do wonder what the timing of all of it, how it will play into even ending the shutdown. The two could potentially impact each other.
Absolutely, they could. Though the messaging in the Virginia races has not been focused on the shutdown to an extent that I think it would provide an unambiguous signal. So people will try to interpret it as such, but there's so many other things going on in Virginia. I think it'd be a stretch to really get there.
And as a quick note here, the top issues for voters, by the way, in that poll: economy, number one, 39%. Threats to democracy, 16%. Healthcare, 10%. Immigration, 9%. Education, and then housing affordability. So that is how people polled, said, what they thought was the most important for them as voters here in Virginia. Interesting, threats to democracy, I think, is a good segue, the number 2 thing on that list, to what's going on with redistricting efforts across the country, but now in Virginia. You heard it from Winsome Sears there, speaking about Abigail Spanberger and recent remarks that were reported that Abigail said that, or Spanberger said that she would not get in the way of redistricting efforts that are certainly right now happening with Democrats trying to change the maps following suit of what happened in Texas and North Carolina, and then what California is trying to do, what happened in Missouri. How do you think that plays into all of this? Do you think voters are going to the poll looking at that? Because that, to me, is one of the more fascinating political discussions that we're having right now. This battle for congressional seats, out in the open, that's taking place state to state.
Yep. So, as you said, this is a national fight. Texas kind of started it. California answered. North Carolina, Virginia, a few other states. And so there's this national argument between the parties. What we've seen is the Democratic Party at one point kind of got on board with the sort of good government policy program of trying to rein in gerrymandering. With substantial Democratic support, Virginia passed a constitutional amendment to create a not quite nonpartisan, but a commission process for drawing district boundaries. And that didn't work terribly well last time. It ended up with the courts having to appoint a special master to set up special masters to draw the district lines. But nonetheless, that process, part of the Virginia Constitution, to overturn it, then you have to change the Virginia Constitution. Democrats pushing to do that. And redistricting politics in general tends to be an area where partisan interests often outweigh people's principles. And so you see one party adopting the principled position that we shouldn't be gerrymandering when they're in the minority, and the other party adopting that position if they become in the minority. And I think that's part of what we're seeing in Virginia, where Democrats see themselves as now increasingly the majority party in the state. They'd like to be able to use that power to draw district lines in ways that reduce Republican chances of winning. And this amendment provides a way for them to do that.
Again, it is, and I was talking with people over the week while I was gone, it just feels like Virginia politics right now are the center of the universe. We're going to learn so much, not only about Virginia, but so much about our country based upon how people go to the polls, or have already been, but the results that we see. I really do think that we're really going to get a kind of a closer look at how people are feeling right now because of what happens right here in our community.
Right. I think that's true. A lot of people are focusing on Virginia. Virginia election outcomes have been historically fairly predictive of what's going to happen in the midterm elections. This is being watched by congressional candidates across the country as they're thinking about, do I want to get into this race? Is this something that I want to be engaging with? How Democrats do, how Republicans do will probably shape calculations by members of Congress about, do I want to retire? Is this a good time to get out while the getting's good, or do I want to stay in? Challengers, do I want to enter this race? Do I want to try to beat an incumbent member of Congress? So it's important. Lots of focus. Ultimately, though, it comes back to Virginians are voting for Virginia representatives. And so they're the national issues, they're national implications of some of our choices. For example, if Democrats retain majorities in the House of Delegates, they'll be able to push ahead with this constitutional amendment to change redistricting. But it's what are the issues that are going to influence how Virginia is governed? Who do you think is going to be the best person to serve as governor, lieutenant governor, attorney general, representative in the House of Delegates in your state?
Well, certainly we will see, and we are now less than 24 hours before the polls open here in Virginia. And certainly I'm always excited for Election Day, but this is been probably one of the more interesting races I've ever covered. And obviously, from a historic nature, you can't really argue that down, really. So looking forward to seeing what happens tomorrow. I'll ask you one last question here. Is there anything that would absolutely shock you tomorrow that you think could potentially, though, be a possibility?
Well, so there has been this anomaly through the season. It's not as strong now as it was, but we've been seeing higher early voting numbers in Republican parts of the state. Not as strongly so now as for sort of the first month of early voting, but still the pattern's still there. And so that raises the question vis-a-vis the polling, which seems to suggest Democrats, especially Spanberger, positioned to do very well. House of Delegates races, Democrats positioned to do very well. What's going on with that early voting, right? So one of the questions I have heading into this is whether that reflects some kind of latent enthusiasm gap that isn't apparent. So that would have me be slightly less surprised than I otherwise would be if Republicans end up having a better night than the polling suggests they will. But I would be quite surprised, given all of the polling that we've seen, if Spanberger doesn't win the governor's race. I think that seems quite likely. The other races, the attorney general, the lieutenant governor, the polling suggests are quite close, and so there it's really going to be the question of how many people are splitting their tickets. Virginians didn't split their tickets much last time, but we didn't have a set of races where there was as much of an air gap between the candidates. Didn't look like this in the polling either. And so I think there will be a fair amount of split ticket voting. I'm also really curious to see what happens with African American turnout. Obama was in Norfolk to try to boost turnout. partly aimed, I think, at African Americans. There's this kind of strange irony almost in that Obama was urging people to vote for the white blonde candidate because they needed to protect the country against racist Republicans who have nominated an African American woman for governor. It's just a little bit of a sort of disjuncture there, and I'm curious kind of how people end up coming down on that.
Yeah, I've seen a few different posts and those who have brought up that exact same conversation. So we will see. This is Dr. Jesse Richman from Old Dominion University. Thank you so much for taking time, getting to talk for 40-something minutes about this, and looking forward to getting your thoughts after we get those results in too.
Always fun to talk with you.
Always, always. Okay, again, those polls, they open tomorrow. Of course, early voting has already taken place, but 6 o'clock in the morning all the way until 7 p.m. And as long as you're in that line before 7 p.m., you will be able to cast your ballot. If you have not yet registered to vote, you can still do so tomorrow on Election Day, but it will be a provisional ballot. But if you have not registered, that is not an excuse. You have still time to do so. You can do it same day of. Just real quick here, Sarah, because we just got this, I just got the email in. We got it into our newsroom a little bit earlier. Speaking of voting, this coming from the City of Newport News. If you are at the polling place at South Morrison Precinct voters, all right, your polling place has had an emergency relocation because of an accident at Ivy Farms Community of Faith Church that's located at 55 Ivy Farms Road. The building is not accessible and is not accessible for voting on Election Day, November 4th. So if that is you, if you're in the South Morrison Precinct and that is where you vote, here's your new voting location. You're going to go to the South Morrison Family Education Center, which is formerly known as the South Morrison Elementary School. That is on 746 Adams Drive. Okay, so I just wanted to put that out there just in case someone's listening and that's their polling location. One has been condemned. You can't get there to vote right now tomorrow, so they've changed that to a new location. Okay, it is 11:43 right now, and Sarah, do we still have up the court proceeding going on in Newport News? We can go back to that for a few minutes if it is still there.
It looks like they just broke for recess.
Okay, they just broke for recess. That is perfectly fine. That is perfectly fine. You know, there's a lot of things that we were sitting there talking about when it comes to elections here in Virginia, but another big one that's taking place across the country at this point is coming out of California, right? We talked about Virginian lawmakers and their attempts now, particularly on the Democratic side, to go ahead and push forward those constitutional amendments so that they can change the maps to gain Democrats more favorable districts. Well, that is all in response to what we first saw happen in Texas, right? When President Trump put out the call for state lawmakers to try to change the U.S. map so that they can receive more favorable seats for the U.S. House of Representatives, so they can widen their lead there and their control within the U.S. House. Texas went first, changing their maps, getting 5 favorable seats, and then you saw, following suit with that, Missouri, 1 favorable seat for GOP, and then in North Carolina, we just saw there 2 weeks ago where they put forth new maps, getting another seat on their behalf in our 1st district here that we cover, actually, in the northeast portion of North Carolina, with Don Davis currently representing that seat. So you saw that happen. Well, California is going to have a really big thing take place for Election Day. Voters there will decide on Proposition 50 on whether or not they will accept the newly drawn maps that were put forward by Democrats in California to counteract those 5 seats that took place in Texas, with 5 of their own favoring Democrats. That is another thing that we're going to be monitoring, because all of that, at the end of the day, you just heard it from Dr. Richman as well, all of that flows into who has control in the House. It's these fights that are happening in the states, but it is a national fight taking place right now. It's a phenomenon that we have not seen at this type of level in our history at this point. So that is something also we'll be looking out for tomorrow as we watch to see what takes place across the country alongside what happens in New Jersey also.